Well, now I have the most pleasant task of the afternoon, and that is to introduce my colleague and my friend, Dr. Wolfgang Lutz. Wolfgang not only won the Wittgenstein Prize, he was the first social scientist to win that prize. And we're very proud of that, and it really works to the benefit, I think, of society through bringing that kind of recognition. Wolfgang is the author of many books, author and co-author of many books. Some are books about the science. Others are edited books with the contributions of many others in them. And Wolfgang has written many more peer-reviewed articles in scientific journals than he has books. He is, in fact, one of the leading demographers, scientific demographers in the world. And Austria is fortunate to have him here and to keep him here. And I am fortunate to have him as my friend. Wolfgang, please speak to us.
Well, thank you, Bill, for your kind words. Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, thank you for coming in so large numbers, partly from very distant corners of the world. This is really a special day for us in the Wittgenstein Center. Well, so much has been said about the substance of what we are working. I'm not sure I have to add anything about it. I just hope you got the feeling that what we try to do at this center is to do cutting-edge scientific analysis on the interface between demography and human capital. As it has been defined, human capital is not just the number of people, but it's the capabilities of people, including the education, the mental capital, and the health components. And we try to do this on a global scale. That's why you also saw representative on our International Advisory Board from around the planet. What distinguishes this demographic approach from many other ways of studying global change? Well, what distinguishes demography is, in its very nature, it has a radical focus on people. I like to define demography as the mathematics of people. Our units of analysis are not dollars or euros. Our units of analysis are the human beings with their characteristics, such as gender, such as age has been mentioned, education, as well as mental and physical health, and it is the well-being that is at the center of our analysis and interest. Of course, there are many other social and cultural humanities sciences that study human beings. But we are different in a way that we study them in a rather quantitative manner that even allows us to make numerical forecasts about future society. Forecasts that can actually be tested against reality. Comparing our forecast to real development then can tell us whether our models were wrong. Hence, in this sense, our models meet the basic prerequisite for being called a science, according to the criteria of Karl Popper. As you know, like Ludwig Wittgenstein, another great Austrian philosopher who went to England. Popper suggested that this criterion of specifying hypotheses precisely enough so that they can be falsified should also apply to the social sciences. It's a daunting task, but we try to meet this aspiration. But in the Wittgenstein Center, we do not only want to do basic analysis in the social sciences, we also want to prepare the scientific basis for some of the most important policy choices of our day. And these most important policy choices are not the ones that tend to fill our newspapers. And unfortunately, they also are not the ones that are mostly discussed in this very room here. The real important policy choices are the ones concerning our common survival on this planet. How to assure lives in good health and dignity for all members of the human family, not only today, but tomorrow and for generations to come. This is the key concept of sustainable development. And as you may know, the world community is preparing for a big global summit on sustainable development next June in Rio de Janeiro, which will have many big challenges on its agenda. But everything is dominated by what I would call a conflict between the two mega agendas of our day. It is the global development agenda with its priority on poverty eradication, and it is the environment agenda with a priority on reducing greenhouse gases and other harmful impact on the environment. Why are these two global agendas in conflict? Well, at least under currently available technologies, coming out of poverty and having higher income almost automatically implies more energy use and producing more greenhouse gas emissions. The only hope for getting out of this dilemma currently lies in what is called green growth, or the move to a green economy. Yes, we need green technologies as soon as possible, there's no doubt about it. But in reality, we are still rather far away from actually decoupling economic growth from negative environmental impacts. We cannot even achieve this in the most advanced economies, not to speak of some of the poorest parts of the world. Well, I think our recent work at the Wittgenstein Center suggests that we also may put somewhat different emphasis in trying to resolve this contradiction between development and environment. In short, it is a win-win solution that lies in the enhancement of global mental capital through education. Let me explain this. On the development side, the scientific findings based on new data as well as complex systems models of the kind that we do at IIASA suggest that of all the many factors contributing to the long-term development of societies, universal education and basic health have a special standing as root causes of development, leading to the basic empowerment and hence help trigger many of the other desirable trends that lead to better quality of life for everybody. These new insights really suggest a radical refocusing of international development priorities, away from big infrastructure projects, which often cause more harm than good, to addressing the root cause, empowering people to help themselves rather than becoming dependent on continued help. This new research also shows in particular the universal education of women makes a big difference. It has been mentioned by several of the previous speakers, but because it is such an important message, let's repeat it to me. Women empowered through literacy and numeracy are in a better position to improve their own health and that of their children and other family members through better access to information, a more rational approach and willingness to change harmful practices. And this is of particular importance when it comes to choosing the number of children in high fertility countries. Of course, in demography, we are concerned about fertility, and this is really at the core of our interest. And here we see that more educated women typically want fewer children, find better access to contraception, and overcome the other obstacles to meeting the unmet need for family planning. For these reasons, as has been said, investments in universal basic female education will be a key factor in reducing unsustainable high population growth in the least developed countries. With respect to economic growth, finally, it has for long been assumed that human capital is the key driver of economic growth. But the economic growth regressions that econometricians estimated did not show this in a consistent way as it was hoped. We now understand that the reason for this lies in using education data without the necessary age detail. With our newly reconstructed data in 5-year age groups using demographic methods, it can be clearly demonstrated that economic growth took off when the better educated young cohorts entered the decisive segments of the labor force. While for countries coming out of poverty, we found that it's the universal basic education that is decisive. But for industrialized countries like Austria, it is the broad-based higher education combined with cutting-edge research that becomes a driver of economic growth. Well, so far this was all on the development side. On the environment side, it is probably even less conventional to point at education. But we believe that a focus on education and mental capital is also a key strategy for dealing with environmental change. Well, in a way, brain power, using our brains, is a zero emissions source of health, of wealth, and of happiness. In terms of the human metabolism, using our brains and enhancing our mental capital does not cause more CO2 emissions than being stupid. Quite the opposite. Better educated people can make better choices, change their behavior more readily, and in particular, pick up newer and cleaner technologies. And in this sense, enhancing the mental capital is accelerating the necessary transition to a green economy. But we also have to face some already unavoidable climate change. That seems to be the consensus among scientists. And here education, again, is particularly important because studies show that better empowered people can adapt to the consequences of already unavoidable climate change more effectively. We found in empirical studies on natural disasters that education reduces the vulnerability even more than income does, and greatly enhances the capacity for recovery after the disaster. In this sense, and this is really a sort of a politically relevant and new idea, the findings suggest that investments in education are likely to be the best long-term investment in enhancing the adaptive capacity to climate change. Finally, the analysis of time trends for most countries around the world also shows that education matters greatly for the transitions of countries to better governance and to free democracies. This has already been mentioned by Jesus. And this brings us right to the topic and the title of this symposium, Demography, Education, and Democracy. It was about a year ago when I met with President Brammer after the Wittgenstein Prize that we started to discuss demography and democracy and found that there are indeed important linkages, and we should further explore what global human capital, global demography implies even for global democracy. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we all entered this parliament building here walking around the huge statues of Pallas Athene outside, who is the goddess of wisdom and the protector of Athens, where 2,500 years ago, the oldest well-documented democracy in human history developed. It was the demos, the population of the city-state, that started to determine its own affairs, not a tyrannos or an aristocracy like in many others. The rule of the demos, that is what democracy is all about. And the study of the structure and development of the demos, that is what demography is all about. I recently saw a book that showed that ancient Athens, around 500 before Christ, was also the most literate society of its time. And literacy made direct democracy possible, and people had to write their votes into pieces of clay. The demos in Athens was empowered through education to make informed choices about its own future. Today, of course, we live in a different and rapidly globalizing world. The challenges of global environmental change require global solutions. In Athens, the demos became united in its fight against Sparta and other enemies. Later, Sparta and Athens joined and merged to form a national Greek demos. And more recently, they've integrated into a European demos with all the problems that we are hearing about these days. But there is a further developing European identity. That's what our data show. And I think we have to ask whether, in the face of the global challenges, climate change and many others, it is not time to further develop our identity to go for an understanding as a global demos, to find the common enemy such as climate change or other global threats. Well, I understand that this is already going beyond what policy-relevant scientific research can say and should say in the name of science. But I will take the liberty to briefly sharing with you some of my personal conclusions from this body of scientific evidence as someone who has worked 25 years on world population problems, which is the global demography. I believe that in order to effectively address the major challenges of global change, while at the same time preserving human rights and the freedom and dignity of all members of the human family, we must move into the direction of global democracy based on an empowered and educated global demos. Once the demos of Athens could jointly address the problems of the city-state, now the demos of the world must jointly address the challenges of humanity. Well, the United Nations are there, and they are the best global body we have for the time being. But if you look more closely, the United Nations only represent the governments of nation-states, primarily pursuing their own national interests. And only in the best of cases we can hope that the sum of national egoisms is also good for the world as a whole. I have serious doubts about that, and with respect to climate change, it clearly does not seem to work. In Europe, we've gone an important step further and complemented the Council of National Governments with representatives of the European demos, the European Parliament. It is now time, I think, to consider complementing the Global Council of Governments, the United Nations, with a representation of the global demos. The demographics of this would be straightforward. If you want to have an assembly of not more than about 800 people that can still meet in a room, and we have a world population of currently around 7 billion, there could be representatives for every beginning 10 million people, one person. But in times of rapidly increasing coverage of the internet, such a more traditional assembly should be complemented with global-level electronic voting of all sorts. Well, I know this all sounds very utopian. It does so to me as well. But somehow my mind tells me that we do not have an alternative. We need a democratically legitimized global moral authority speaking out for the common shared interest of humanity. But as in Athens 2,500 years ago, the education of the demos was a prerequisite for a functioning democracy, and it is so today. And this brings us back to global education as a priority, not only for global sustainable development, but also for global democracy. Again, this future vision of global democracy, which I just shared with you, goes beyond the strictly scientific agenda of the Wittgenstein Center. But this new center will focus on establishing the research basis for a rational discussion of the effects of demographic change and education on health, on economic growth, on the move to green technologies, on enhancing the adaptive capacity to already unavoidable climate change, on the quality of institutions, and other outcomes that matter for the well-being of humans today, tomorrow, and for generations to come. Well, let's go out to the hall and raise the glass to the success of this daunting research agenda. Thank you for your attention.